This video is about the independent variable, dependent variable, control variable, and research question in a lab report. These are the first few things you have to fill out when deciding what your lab report is going to be about. We can start off with the independent and dependent variable. The independent variable is the thing that you control and change in an experiment, whereas the dependent variable is the thing that is affected by what you change. You measure the effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable. That's what your whole lab report is based around. How does the independent variable affect the dependent variable? As an example, we could pretend that we're doing an experiment where we're boiling different amounts of water and we're testing and seeing how long it takes those different amounts of water to completely evaporate away after we boil them. In that situation, the independent variable would be the amount of water that we're testing. We could test, say, 1 cup or 2 cups or 3 cups of water and boil that much at a time, and that's what we can directly control and change ourselves in the experiment. And the dependent variable would be the amount of time that it takes for the water to completely boil away, because that's the thing that we're testing that's being affected by our independent variable. So if we're testing how long it takes for different amounts of water to boil away, the independent variable would be the amount of water, and the dependent variable would be how much time it takes that water to boil away. Another example could be if we're running a race car, like a toy race car, down a track, and we want to see how much distance it will cover as a result of driving for a certain amount of time. The independent variable here would be the time that it's been driving for, because that's what we can control. We can control when it starts and stops, and so we can control how long it drives for. And the dependent variable would be the distance that it covered as a result of driving for that amount of time. So the independent variable would be time, and the dependent variable would be distance. One last example, we could imagine that we're growing plants with different amounts of water. So we're giving different plants different amounts of water and seeing how high they grow as a result. In this situation, the independent variable would be the amount of water that the plant received, and the dependent variable would be how high the plant grew as a result of that water. So it would be the height of the plant. So the independent is the amount of water, and the dependent is the height of the plant. The next definition you need to know is control variables. A control variable is anything that you keep constant in an experiment to make sure that it does not affect the results. Going back to our examples, in the example of boiling different amounts of water to see how long it would take to evaporate, we would want to make sure that the temperature that we're boiling the water at is the same for each experiment. Because if we also use different temperatures, then we don't know whether it's the temperature or the amount of water that's affecting how long it takes to completely evaporate. So we would want to keep the temperature completely the same. You may also know that water boils at different temperatures at different altitudes, so we'd want to make sure that we're testing the water at the same physical height above sea level. So those would be two control variables for that experiment. For the race car example, where we're testing how far it goes as a result of driving for different amounts of time, we'd want to make sure that the race car itself stays the same, that the track it's on stays the same, things like that, just things that would not impede it from moving the way that it normally would for a certain amount of time. For the plant example, we would want to make sure that we're using the same type of plant. So if we're comparing two completely different species of plant, that's not really going to tell us much useful information when we want to know how high they grow as a result of getting water. We'd also want to make sure that the plants have the same amount of sunlight, that they're in the same type of soil, things like that. These would all be examples of control variables. The last definition that you need to know is the research question. The research question is the question that your lab report is trying to answer. Your research question should always ask, how does your independent variable affect your dependent variable? So in your lab report, you're always going to have to write down a question like this, where you ask, how does IV affect DV? That's what the research question is. So in the water example, the research question would be, how does the amount of water being boiled affect the time it will take for the water to completely evaporate? In the race car example, the research question, how does the amount of time a race car has been driving affect the distance it has covered? And for the plant example, the research question would be, how does the amount of water that a plant receives affect the height that the plant grows to? So those are the definitions. These are 4 things you need to know at the beginning of your lab report.